Claremont Lincoln University. I am with Will McGarvey here at the Parliament for the World's Religion here in Salt Lake City, Utah. How are you doing today, Will?
I'm well, thank you.
It's great to have you here. I just wanted to first off say thank you. You are on board with us at Claremont Lincoln University. You are a part of the teaching faculty in the Interfaith Action program. You will be teaching this term?
Religion in the public sphere.
Okay, are you excited about that course?
Very much so, and have great students.
Really?
They're already chiming in and on their way to further exploration.
That's good, because that's a unique course. Religion in the Public Sphere looks specifically at the role of religion and how it is increasing in the public sphere, and how civic officials, institutions are engaging religious or religion-based institutions and religion-based actors as well. So some of these issues are relevant today.
Very much so. I'm a half-time pastor of a congregation, an ecumenical Presbyterian United Church of Christ community.
Oh wow, yeah.
And I spend the other half of my time as Executive Director of the Interfaith Council of Contra, Costa County.
Oh wow.
And we have a social justice alliance that's a part of the Interfaith Council that's been doing a lot of policy work for the last 20 or 30 years actually. Yeah. And looking out for immigrants, for the homeless. Our Social Justice Alliance oversees our Winter Nights rotating shelter that operates between October and May and helps families with children to be able to have some shelter and hopefully get into permanent housing. And this is something we started 11 years ago when we noticed that our county was experiencing more homelessness, especially with families with children.
Right.
And just this last year and a half, many of the members of our congregations have been realizing that it's harder and harder for us to serve a lot of those families, and that they're staying in our program longer and longer. And rather than just trying to address the symptoms, which the churches and the synagogues and the mosques have been historically called upon to be able to serve, we decided to take bolder action and started a Multifaith Action Coalition, which is doing some advocacy among elected officials and actually figuring out where are the new holes in those places that aren't being served in our community in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. And so we started 5 different task forces, one for housing and shelter, one for food security, one for education, jobs, and health. And it's led to a lot of advocacy and training folks in our congregations to be able to claim their own faith and to be able to speak from that faith place, to be able to encourage our elected leaders to be able to address some of the needs and to really look at the systems that make people poor and keep people poor.
I like that. I like, well, not the fact that there are systems that keep people poor, but I like the fact that you're looking at the social justice component. That's one of the things that I was really interested in when I was looking at your CV and just reviewing your bio, is that, yeah, you know, Will, you're a spiritual leader, but at the same time, you're working at the grassroots level. You're a practitioner. Kind of brings me to the question, over the last, let's say, 15, 20 years, how has the interfaith movement, you know, in your city changed tremendously? Well, just say San Francisco and the Bay Area. How has it changed over the last 15, 20 years?
Housing prices right now have gone up almost 50% in the last 2 years. Before that, with the housing slump and the foreclosure crisis, we saw a lot of people being kicked out of their homes. And a lot of those folks didn't need to be. The banks chose to do that. In fact, some of those homes are still empty in certain parts of the Bay Area, while there are other speculators coming in and buying up homes for cash in order to increase rents. And so just paying attention to what are the needs in the community. 11 years ago when I started at my congregation, a lot of Hispanic folks were moving in, and now the city that my church is in is 40% Hispanic, 20% African American, 19% Asian and Pacific Islander, and only about 25% white. And what we've noticed is that during the foreclosures and the tightening of belts during the bank crises, is that a lot of the folks that are the most at risk tend to be folks that either don't have the resiliency or the family history to be able to know how to save and to be able to make it through that time, or they don't have family nearby, or they're new immigrants. And So some of our work has been calling on Congress and our state to have better policies around comprehensive immigration reform, especially with the real human costs that many of those families incur.
Yeah.
And at the same time, trying to remind folks that there's a huge need for housing that's affordable, especially given, even in California, where our minimum wage is higher than most other states, a living wage in our county is $27 an hour, and the California minimum wage is just over $10.
It seems that the interfaith movement is moving in a direction now where human capital is extremely important. Human capital in the sense of making sure that people can live and survive together as brothers and sisters is extremely important today. And also issues around poverty, education, literacy are becoming new themes, in the interfaith movement. So you have folks from the Abrahamic faiths that are focusing on, let's say, peacemaking, our Buddhist brothers and sisters who are thinking about hunger. You go over to the indigenous side, individuals talking about the earth and environmental issues and policy. So it seems like the interfaith sphere is an alternative arena, outside of the public sphere in a way, where real conversations can take place.
A lot of the Muslims on our councils, and we have 4 kinds of Muslims, including Ahmadiyya and Moorish Science Temple Muslims, in addition to Sunni and Shia Muslims. After 9/11, felt like a lot of them had to open their doors and really start to explain who they are in order to feel at home in our society. And many of the leaders did just that and were very sacrificial in the amount of time that they took in sharing the heart of Islam with their neighbors. And there still tends to be quite a lot of Islamophobia in our world. This last March, we felt that with the amount of Islamophobia just in our general culture, we needed to do something. And so we had a ring of solidarity around one of our larger masjids, and then had speakers from the Jewish and the Christian and the Muslim community. And one of the, it's a little hard to
I can understand. Take your time.
One of the most tender moments was one of the women who had talked to some of the young people. And thinking about future days when something would happen on a national basis, or some Muslim somewhere in the world makes an action and folks in the Islamic community in the United States would feel at risk in their own house of worship or in their own home. And she said now she has the time to be able to point back and say, but now we can say, remember that day when they encircled our mosque and sang us peace songs. That doesn't happen on a regular basis in this country. In fact, there's a $40 million campaign and industry that continues to produce media that blames Islam as a religion and a culture for every terrorist act in the world.
Where does this culture of hate and the culture wars that we see, like, where is this coming from? I mean, it's always been around in a sense, laying dormant in American society in particular. But we see now more than ever before, especially right after 9/11. And you have not only someone to blame, but a new community to defame in a sense. And as Daisy Khan always talks about, the militants and extremists are really 0.0000001, of the Islamic world and the Islamic population.
Well, and this is the irony that's going to come up tomorrow at our panel on ideological violence and hate speech, is that there's an inordinate amount of fear among especially white Americans that they could become victimized by Islamic radical, and yet the biggest risk to them is actually white Christian extremists.
This is true. This is true. The Pew Forum, not the Pew, but what was that? Southern Poverty Law Center just produced a report that clearly stated that since 2001, Americans have been attacked more by white males who belong to extremist organizations than Muslims. And it seems like it's this idea that this new other, and again I use the phrase the new other because in this country there's always something to fear.
I'm not sure it's a new other, you know, because I think when it was the Cold War, Muslims and Middle Eastern terrorists were kind of lumped together as the threat that was coming from outside. I think it's a part of a broader change and shift that's going on in our society that that we're seeing more people of color in greater parts of the country, places where they haven't lived in significant numbers before. And now people are having more interaction with people of different cultures and racial ethnic backgrounds. And there's a fear on the part of some, especially white male people, that they're losing their privilege in this society. And it feels like there's a lashing out that comes with that. And part of it might be related to the response to modernity. Karen Armstrong points out it tends to be a much more fundamentalist response in order to try and retain comforting views of Christianity or other forms of religion that have held in the past and that either are more modern or postmodern understandings of those religions or cultures or even just civil rights are being challenged so many ways over the last 30 or 40 years in our culture.
I see exactly where you're going. So we're dealing now with a tectonic shift. The plates are shifting in American society. We're moving toward the minority-majority world. Well,
in California, I'm a minority.
Right, which is it's different and uncommon for me coming from, let's say, Louisiana and Alabama, where African Americans are still, in particular, in the minority, and people of color are in the minority. But in cities like Huntsville, which is a pretty progressive city, people of color are 51%. So if we look at this nation moving towards 2025, 2030, 2035, we realize that the dynamic is shifting. Whites will be in the minority. So we begin to think about...
But I still have a lot of privilege in this culture.
That's true. So
as a white man that presents as a white man, even though I have some African ancestry, I present as a white man and I have blue eyes. And so our culture gives me a lot more deference and privilege and aren't afraid of me like other people that are being tackled in a bank because other people call the police being afraid that there's a black person in their bank.
Brown and black bodies in public space suffering in American society, which is not a new and uncommon thing. But what about this loss of power and privilege for white males in American society right now?
I think it's persisted as long as it has because of the corporate influence that has encouraged and defunded certain neighborhoods in metropolitan areas while funding new housing development where more affluent and more white people tend to gravitate to those areas. Even the history of Ferguson, Missouri, and what used to be a mainly white, blue-collar neighborhood being basically evacuated and letting it become an African-American, predominantly populated city, while most of the white people fled to different parts of the rings of the suburbs around St. Louis. And then there's very little interaction between people, except in those places where there continue to be white police officers in African American communities that have given up on community policing. And they've given up on being a part of the community and really knowing who the people are that they're serving. And then we see flare-ups like Cleveland and
Baltimore,
Ferguson, Baltimore, all of these places that there's been a systemic decapitalization in these areas. And so houses that are moving towards Blight aren't given the finances and the funding and the loans to be able to fix up those neighborhoods. And then there's you know, and we see it on Fox News all the time. Well, these people don't take care of their own neighborhoods.
Right.
They're not taking care of their own children, without recognizing that there's a system that has encouraged, in my part of California, some families are 3-generation families that have been on welfare, and when a young person in that environment doesn't have the family culture of saving money, when they do get a job and they finally have $1,000 in their pocket, they don't know what to do.
Right.
Some of them will go to work for 2 or 3 weeks. They'll have this money that they're not used to paying bills or to working towards saving, and then the people that are putting them into these apprentice jobs are upset because they don't come back for the work. And so we need to invest not just the funds, but we need to invest in the culture of helping folks build the self-resiliency to be able to look beyond the next paycheck and look beyond the excuses that they may have used in the past.
You make a good point. I just want to turn the conversation over to policy. And one of the reasons why we see some of these deeply conservative policies today, do you think that it's linked to the fear by many policymakers in DC in particular who are white, that this country is changing, it's shifting. And if this country is changing and shifting, let's keep the playing field uneven, at least for another 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
I've been surprised at the length to which the GOP is willing to try to decrease and suppress voter turnout among people of color.
Right.
And it's actually shameful.
Yeah.
The other side of it is I think there's a new religion since Reagan.
Wow.
And I think we need to start in an interfaith circle question whether or not free market capitalism doesn't worship that invisible hand.
Open that up a little bit right there.
Well, we've been sold this economic system that says that if we give enough money from the federal government to employers and then label them as job creators and other people as takers, that all of those funds will eventually make it down to create better blue-collar, higher-paying jobs. When at the same time, a lot of those jobs are being sent out of the country by people who profit for it, like Mitch McConnell, and his Taiwanese business connections through his wife's.
And Co. Right.
And so you have both of those systems going on at the same time, and so you basically are telling people that, well, the market knows what's best, and the market knows who can be competitive and who can't, while at the same time there's a structure of actually moving manufacturing jobs out of the country and suppressing wage growth over the last 20 or 30 years. If the minimum wage had grown with the actual value, most people would be making around $20 an hour right now. But a lot of those wages have been suppressed while we've been living under this kind of idea that as long as we keep cutting taxes, then the system will work. And it worked long enough for Reagan to get out of office, and then Bush, and then Clinton turned it back a little bit, while creating some other problems. And then it kind of came back with the George W. Bush administration, and some of them are getting turned back by Obama, but not all of them, and there's not the same protections with the market and all of the volatility that we've seen used there to siphon off the wealth of a lot of Americans. And so just looking at this as a theological issue, if we trust this invisible hand to oversee and bring about the best kind of economy without recognizing what's going on behind the scenes, and the decreasing of the ability of the American people to be able to be partners with owners of corporations in the wealth and the prosperity and the production increases that we've been able to have over the last few years, now we're starting to see the ability to continue to increase poverty way down, and what we're seeing is people are working multiple jobs
more now than ever before,
and the productivity is actually going down.
Right.
And And so there's a lot of young people despairing that they're going to be able to have the same kind of lifestyle that their parents have, let alone attain the same educational abilities.
It seems like this is a deeply, deeply important topic for the interfaith movement. And it seems like the interfaith movement, it's moving in a direction where it wants to have this conversation, but parts of the global interfaith movement still stuck in the kumbaya, I just want to be in the same place with people from multiple religious traditions or belief systems and just feel good about being in that space. And it seems that now these issues are forcing us, practitioners in particular, to move beyond the feel-good space and into the streets, to put our faith and our beliefs into action.
The times of crisis, the times of Charleston bring us together, and oftentimes those are times for us to rally around one another.
That's it.
And to be able to break down some of those differences in culture and even the faith traditions that we have, and the differences between the black church and the white church within Christianity are huge differences that need to be addressed. And what does it mean for us to be people of faith and even co-religionists working supposedly towards the same goals? How well do we really communicate with each other, let alone with folks of different cultures?
Right.
And so you know, there are those times that does serve a purpose for us to be able to come together, to know what each other's food and cultures, and to be able to heal some historic wrongs, especially around the Holocaust and around some of the other genocides that have gone on in different parts of the world. And I've been able to see some of that in some of the work that we've been doing in solidarity around Assyrian Christians and the Yazidi people. Being able to see Armenians in the same room as Turks. And so sometimes that knowledge comes when we really take the time to listen. What are the needs of my neighbor? And when we listen to the Baha'is, we hear that the lack of access to higher education in Iran is such a central issue for them that many of them are actually teaching online for students, Baha'i students, to be able to take college level courses and staying up in the middle of the night to be able to provide those courses for them. And so upon hearing that, then you can be in solidarity with them and help make the statement and help provide the forums for the educational ability for folks to even know what's going on for religious minorities in Iran, let alone other places where there's conflict.
You know, I'm thinking about Dr. King's vision around the beloved community. Are we moving towards this beloved community where folks from different worldviews, ethnic traditions and religious traditions, belief systems are really working to live together, to love one another, and to do good in the world, but more importantly, to promote social justice in the world? Are we moving towards that?
I think we're struggling through the birth pangs of that, because to get there, we have to shed a lot of different aspects of our own privilege, of our own desire to see our own experience as primary, and part of that is learning how to listen. And the folks that are the most vocal in this society right now are the folks that are not listening. It's as if their mantra is, I saw this cartoon, I can't remember if it's The Far Side or what, but it has a person sitting in the lotus position and they have their hands in a very prayerful stance, and their words was, "Shut up and agree with me, shut up and agree with me, shut up and agree with me." And we've allowed our cable news to turn into that. We've allowed so many parts of our culture to turn into that. That's public. And you know, some of our news stations continue to call the Family Research Council, which has been named a hate group by the Southern Poverty Law Center, to represent Christianity whenever there's some kind of interfaith conversation, rather than calling the peoples like yourself and myself, who are actually working with folks of different faith, might be able to speak from a moderate to progressive Christian perspective, and and not represent every particular person with such a broad brush, and to actually give a nuanced answer to why different people believe in different ways.
It seems like there's deep bias in society today, global society, but most importantly in American society. And what's strange, but you know, it's not a surprise, it's that we are falling in love with satire today. I mean, when you look at, you know, the top cable, you know, stations, it's like ESPN. I mean,
the Borowitz Report, The Onion.
Right. It's like, is this real? I mean, why are we tearing apart people from different ethnic groups, cultures, traditions, as if it's okay? Free speech versus hate speech, and how we run and hide behind the notion of the First Amendment and free speech in order to throw a rock, you know, that's labeled with hate speech today. So I think that we really need to kind of nip that in the bud, and that's one of the issues that interfaith practitioners should really focus on.
Well, and that's something that I'm going to address in my Claremont Lincoln University course, is there is a need for the International Religious Freedom Restoration Acts. But when that gets used in order to deny people their civil rights, then we need to think hard about where we draw that line, and how do we create a forum that allows people to share their statements of conscience while still making sure that everyone's civil rights are protected.
That's it. Well, Will, thank you so much for this opportunity. Sitting here chatting with you. I look forward to participating in the panel, and also, you know, for you working with us at Claremont Lincoln University.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.